I think we will start, and other people will trickle in. For those of you, I think some of you haven't been on in a while, but the way we'll do this is Kathy is going to introduce Jerome, and then he's going to share a screen. And once he starts, he's willing to take questions whenever you have them. So I would ask everybody who's participating to mute themselves. And then if they have a question, raise your hand, and I will acknowledge that you've done that, and I'll find a time to say, Jerome, we got a question from the field and blah, blah, blah. So if you want further clarification, and then in the discussion at the end, we'll do it the same way, raise your hand. And but you know, when we start discussing at the end, it gets a little more free form. Raising the hands is good, and I will try to negotiate that with everybody, but sometimes people just jump in, and that's okay too. So with that, I think I will turn it over to Kathy for introductions, and then from Kathy to Jerome.
Thank you very much, Dean and Jerome. Thank you so much for being here with us today. I'm really, really excited to hear from Jerome, and even more than that, from being able to ask him questions. He is the national leader in knowing about this stuff. And we have a lot of conversations going on recently about capacity and who knows what. And Jerome brings all the capacity in the world to his work. He's not only an attorney, he's a CPA, he's a lead professional, he has a bachelor's in architecture degree, but he's also the expert on affordable housing and housing development. He came to his work from the community builders, where he worked on actual projects. So he knows what we're all dealing with in our various roles in projects. But he's also maintained for so many years federal resources and tax credits. And more than that, he knows about them and how to apply them to projects. And so I'm really glad to hear from him. And he spends his free time in this field too, being on the Winchester Housing Partnership Board, on the boards of professional organizations, working for the Harvard Real Estate Club. And I just learned when I was Googling him before this that he follows the Seed Network, where I was a founder. So many things in common with this group of fantastic peers. These are leading architects and energy consultants and public officials really dedicated to sustainabilty. So Jerome, welcome back to the Peer-to-Peer for your second presentation for us in many years.
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, no, this definitely is a group that's kind of well aligned with a lot of the things that I'm passionate about. So it's always good to talk. And yeah, I think it's been a few years, certainly, but love to give an update and kind of reconnect with you all. So I am an attorney in the law firm of Polsonelli, and as mentioned, you know, I do different tax credit projects, a lot of affordable housing, a lot of light tech deals, mainly representing lenders and tax credit equity investors. We do support some developers as well, but a growing area of energy practice. And with this relatively new law firm that I've joined last year, you know, we have a large energy group. We have just kind of full service business attorneys and IP and all that. But my practice group is called the Tax Credit Finance Group, and we've been monitoring all these new green incentives. And as you know, Kathleen mentioned, like, you know, this summer just was a huge, just a huge benchmark for kind of the work that we're trying to do here. I think many of you are on that compendium list that she mentioned, you know, that 50-state survey of state and federal incentives relating to energy efficiency and green energy. And by far, you know, this summer's change was the biggest that I've been keeping track of, you know, for the, let's say 12, 13 years now. And so, yeah, since then I've been on so many webinars like this. Like I just had one yesterday, and like a lot of like in-person conferences, panels, like just one-on-one discussions with people trying to figure out, how this is going to work and what the opportunities are. And it's such a big field. And, this group, it only touches on, really, honestly, a small piece of it, but an important piece of it, especially if, you consider the whole like Justice 40 kind of initiative where, 40% of these resources for this energy infrastructure and the clean, climate infrastructure needs to be designated for, low income areas and benefiting kind of low income households and populations. And so especially where there's an intersection with kind of affordable housing and community economic development and kind of green, that is, I think, going to be a huge part of this. I will share my screen. All right, does everybody see that? Great. So I'll go to the next slide here. So when we're talking about the Inflation Reduction Act, a lot of it was extensions and expansions of the existing tax credits, right? So, we were in a regime that had tax credits for solar and wind and things like that. But they were generally kind of stepping down. And so before the Inflation Reduction Act, we were actually in a situation where the tax credits for like solar were actually stepping down ultimately to 10%. So, that was definitely worrisome. And now we are in a position where we have long-term tax credits in place back to the 30% and plus more than that. So, which I'll talk about. So here's a list of the different incentives that were in place before and then got extended and expanded, and a lot of the dollar amounts for these incentives got increased. The first two are the main credits, the investment tax credit and production tax credit. Those are technically going to be around till 25, but there will be new incentives that actually replace that. And they will generally be, follow along the same order, but I'll talk about that. But these are the lists, and I'll go through in depth a little bit more for each of them. So the first one is Section 48. So that's probably the most well-known credit for kind of green energy. Most of the solar projects take advantage of the investment tax credit. So there are some new technologies that got added officially to this investment here in the bullet point, the fourth bullet point here: energy storage, microgrid controllers, interconnection properties. Those are now kind of officially part where those can actually be standalone projects for investment tax credit. Essentially, it's a 30% tax credit. So 30% of the costs could be covered by the investment tax credit. There are bonuses, which I'll talk more about there, but in that third bullet point, you'll see some of those bonuses. If you are in the housing space and work with low-income housing tax credits, a big change is that if you have investment tax credit property also included in your low-income housing tax credit property, it doesn't reduce the low-income housing tax credit basis. So that was a big win that the affordable housing developers were trying to go for. So that is kind of some of the basics. And again, we'll go into some detail in a few slides later. But the production tax credit, I think generally wouldn't apply to this group, but again, there's a much larger energy sector that is benefiting from this, and in the current policy of trying to transition to, big wind farms and other renewable solar farms that are, much larger utility scale, would normally apply to this regime of the production tax credit. Again, some bonuses and such, which we'll cover. Section 45L was an existing credit, again, also expanded. And so this is a tax credit for energy efficient net zero property or Energy Star homes. So you see the amounts listed here: $5,000 for a single family net zero, $2,500 for Energy Star level. And then you have the corresponding amounts for multifamily units on a per unit basis. kind of the big change is that there is a 5x multiplier. So you can get that 1,000 per unit up to 5,000 per unit if the project meets this prevailing wage requirement, which I'll cover in, again, a future slide. But if you're looking at a project that, let's say, is already under prevailing wage requirements, and you have you can get the project to qualify for kind of this net zero ready multifamily, 5,000 a unit. It's a much larger incentive than before. And again, this credit no longer reduces the tax credit basis for housing. So that's another benefit similar to the investment tax credit. 179D is a deduction, an energy efficient commercial building deduction. It's a per square foot basis. So that this again was expanded, extended and expanded. So there's a 50-cent per square foot base, and it goes up to $1 if there's energy reduction by a certain benchmark. And again, there's a 5x multiplier if you can meet prevailing wage and apprenticeship requirements for the project. So that can go up to $5 a square foot. So there's some big increases, again, based on if your project would qualify. There's also a new retrofit plan for existing buildings, a different type of calculation and measuring system, gives a couple different pathways. And another big change is, so historically, public agencies, public government owners could allocate this deduction to the designer. And the change, so that still exists, but now it also provides for private nonprofits to actually also allocate this deduction to the designer. So now that opens up more options for private nonprofits that don't pay tax and don't really have the benefit, the need for a benefit like this that they can allocate to the designer. So that was a change in the act. Charging stations got expanded. So this is for EVs, 30% tax credit. You see the maximum dollar amounts there. So if there's, again, the whole kind of national policy of trying to electrify our fleets, reduce reliance on fossil fuels, that infrastructure for charging stations, needs to be in place. So I think this actually is going to be a really big boost for that. One important change is that for charging stations in urban areas, that urban area census tract actually has to be a low income census tract, which is really defined in a statute tied to the new markets tax credit eligible census tract, which is a really interesting kind of wrinkle that they added there. So if you're in an urban area and you're looking at charging stations, you got to look at whether it's a new market tax credit census tract. If you're in a suburban or rural areas, then it doesn't matter. It could be located anywhere. I won't spend too much time on this, but basically there's tax credits for electric vehicles themselves. They added some domestic manufacturing and component requirements, and there are also income limits actually for the households that actually purchase it. So if you have too high an income level, you might not be able to access these tax credits for electric vehicles. 25C are more for homes and personal residences. So again, there are tax credits available for heat pumps, highly efficient doors, windows, insulation. Again, these are for kind of personal residences. Same thing for energy. There's the existing 25D that I got expanded. So solar for homes, fuel cells, geothermal. So there's battery storage also allowed for this credit. So those are kind of covers the existing expansions for the credits. This is a list for the new credits. So these first two, again, are the replacements that will be starting in 2025 for the original Section 48 and the original Section 45. So I'll talk quickly about those, and then some other manufacturing and more kind of commercial tax credits that I'll just kind of skip through, but just so you know that those are around. So generally, there is this new 45E that will be coming in a couple of years that would replace the investment tax credit. And the approach, this will be more of a what they call technology neutral. And so it wouldn't necessarily list specific technologies like geothermal or solar, but it would really be based on whether the project or technology is connected to anticipated greenhouse gas reductions. So it's really, they're really trying to, I guess, be flexible in terms of whatever new technologies come up in the future that meets the goals of the greenhouse gas reduction. So the other important part is basically the credit is around until at the soonest 2032, or the year that the actual greenhouse gas emissions are 25% of last year's emissions. So, so technically in the statute, this tax credit is now going to be around in its current form until at least 10 years. And who knows when we actually get to 25% level of emissions. I mean, I don't, that's a pretty high bar. So, but that's kind of in place again for a long time to kind of encourage investment in this. So similar approach with the production tax credit for, generally applies to wind. Again, I'll just kind of skim through these, but there are some tax credits for manufacturing, and the whole idea is that, can we bring onshore, the manufacturing of these clean technologies, encourage jobs and supply chains that are domestic. There's a 45X credit, and then there's that manufacturing credit from before. Batteries, the policy of trying to get batteries made in the USA. There's some credits for clean vehicles, for more commercial clean vehicles. Think like buses and semis and other type of commercial vehicles. Biofuels is also kind of a big part of the act. They're trying to get kind of clean transportation and hydrogen kind of incentivized. So again, but those generally probably wouldn't apply to your projects, but just so you know that those are out there as well, and there is a wider industry looking at those. So this slide talks about the bonuses, and so so a big change in the act are new increased credits amounts based on some of these areas and policies. So the first one being prevailing wage and apprentices. So you heard me mention prevailing wage in a lot of the other slides, the prior slides. So essentially, a lot of the incentives can get a 5X multiplier if the labor and the mechanics that are working on the project are being paid prevailing wage. So so there is that federal standard, right? And the Department of Labor is involved. There's some initial regulations that came out last year, end of last year, basically giving guidance about, if you had questions about the prevailing wage, what that level is. The Department of Labor essentially has a hotline to be able to kind of answer any questions, kind of make sure people have that. So it's important to note that this generally applies to bigger projects. So if your project is 1 megawatt, it's less than 1 megawatt, you do not need to meet the prevailing wage and apprenticeship requirements to get to the 30% or for the ITC. But there are other tax credits that that this applies to, that these requirements apply to. But in general, if you're talking about, let's say, a multifamily building or rooftop solar, you do not need to do prevailing wage and apprenticeship requirements. You will get the 30% tax credit automatically. Apprenticeship. So, in 2024, it's going to be up to 15% of the labor hours that actually need to be performed by qualified apprentices. And so again, the policy being, I think they're trying to get a workforce ready to do these types of projects. There is a good faith effort kind of exemption for that if there happens to not be apprenticeship programs in the area or accessible. But otherwise, it's pretty far-reaching. Each taxpayer, even the subcontractors, contractors, generally have to employ at least one apprentice. So, I think that is going to be a big requirement coming up, and obviously the prevailing wage, in terms of cost of the projects as well. Domestic content, you can get an additional 10% increase in tax credits if your components, steel, iron, are made in the USA. So there's a big question of whether we actually do have that right now, and at least in the short run. But that is available. Taxpayers have to certify that these components have been made in the USA to be able to get that extra 10%. There's also another 10% bonus for certain locations, for projects in certain locations. So brownfield sites, different metropolitan statistical areas that are based on historic fuel economy and have high unemployment. So again, kind of like energy transition type of communities that have, coal mines or kind of oil and gas economies that are high unemployment or kind of low income census tracts. Those are generally kind of what this policy is about. So if your project happens to be in those areas, that's something to look at for additional credits. And then lastly, there is this environmental justice bonus. So that's either a 10% or 20% bonus in the investment tax credits for projects that qualify. And so this is targeted more toward low-income census tracts. So again, the new market census tract designation comes into play here with a possible plus 10%. And then also tribal Indian land, if a project is located there, it's another plus 10%. If your project is located in a low-income residential building, including low-income housing tax credit projects, it's a plus 20% tax credit. So instead of having a 30% tax credit, you actually have a 50% tax credit. Same thing with what they call a kind of a low-income economic benefit project, where let's say a solar project shares its economic benefits for low-income households. Generally here, like less than 80% AMI, that's another option for another 20%. So for that last option, imagine like it's a solar farm, a community solar project that has its, the energy generated designated for them to be sold at, below market rates or kind of somehow a lower cost of electricity to benefit low-income households. That's what I'm imagining that option is about. There are very important for this is that these are not automatic. There is actually an application process for projects to get allocated these bonus tax credits, and guidance just, I think this week, laid out kind of the breakout of kind of, how much allocation per year is going to go for each of these categories. So here, 700 megawatts for the low-income communities, 200 megawatts for Indian land, 200 megawatts for low-income buildings, and then 700 megawatts for economic benefit projects. And so there is going to be an application procedure, and right now it looks like it's going to be the third quarter of this year in which those things are going to be set up and being ready to be processed for applications for this bonus tax credit. On just the last couple slides here, there are some structural changes that are also really big benefits for what we're trying to do here for energy and transition to clean energy. There are a couple of elections that I'll go through here. The first one being for tax exempt organizations. So for nonprofits, public agencies, schools, public and private schools, municipalities, hospitals, museums, university campuses, any type of tax exempt organization, they can now elect to get a cash refund of the value of the tax credits. So because generally, those non-tax paying entities don't need a tax credit. They would otherwise have to do very complicated structures to, get an investor to be able to monetize the credit. So this election now allows for them just to get to receive a cash refund. So that's a huge change and a big benefit for flexibility to try to structure these types of projects. The next slide talks about a second election for taxable organizations. So for-profit taxable organizations, they can now elect to transfer the tax credit to another taxpayer who would actually claim the credit for a payment in cash or for cash consideration. So if you are a for-profit taxpayer owner of these types of projects, but don't necessarily have the tax liability to actually benefit from the tax credit, you can actually now just transfer it to another taxpayer that does have that tax appetite and be able to basically sell the credits. So that's also, again, gives much more flexibility, especially for smaller projects. In the past, these projects were done with, private investors coming in that have the tax appetite as a limited partner, and then the tax credits would be allocated through a partnership structure. I think that those projects would still happen, especially for the larger ones. If you have a tax credit partnership already in place, let's say for like a low-income housing tax credit project, since that structure is already in place, you wouldn't necessarily need to go this route with an election, but maybe there's some added flexibility, that this could provide. I think where this really helps is also for smaller projects, where kind of the whole structure for getting an investor really doesn't make sense for smaller projects. This could be a way to create a market for those smaller projects and make it easier to connect to investors, so that the project owners can monetize the tax credit. Last slide here, just a note for tax exempt bond projects, any type of public project that has tax exempt bonds or let's say a 4% low income housing tax credit deal, there is a reduction of the solar tax credits or energy tax credits based on the amount of tax exempt bond financing. So that's something to look out for. And that is it. So yeah, happy to take any questions or.
Yeah, thanks, Jerome. This is Dean. Everybody can sort of prepare their questions. If you have one, just raise your hand and I'll recognize you for Jerome. I think maybe if you could leave your presentation up, in case you need to go back to a slide to clarify something. So does anybody have any questions top of mind right now? If you do, raise your hand. And thanks for a great presentation. It's kind of stunning when you see it laid out actually in one place. I've seen other presentations on it, but in terms of this sort of made it come home to me a little bit how comprehensive this whole thing is. Kathy has a question, so go ahead, Kathy.
I have so many questions, but I'm going to ask one now and hopefully get a chance to come back in. So this is the first time I had seen the reduction based on the tax exempt bonds.
Yeah.
And so tax exempt bonds can be during construction period or in the permanent financing. Does it matter? And can you just talk a little bit more about how this works?
Yeah, really good question. And I think it's early. The one deal that I've seen that had 4% tax credits And so tax exempt bond financing, I think the investors and everybody involved were comfortable saying that the dollars that were used to actually build the solar were from were from part of the sources that were not tax exempt bond financing, so that we actually didn't reduce the solar tax credits. I kind of buy that argument, but I think it's early to see. Well, we'll see how it goes. But essentially, yeah, the rule is it would be a maximum 15% reduction for the solar tax credit, or if it's lesser, the fraction of the tax exempt financing and the actual, the total financing essentially. I think where this is going to be a little bit of a bigger hit is where you're talking about like big systems for like big public projects that are, let's say, like a school building or school project that has a big like solar. And we're just on a webinar yesterday. We're talking about this. So yeah, you got to look at the tax exempt bond. I mean, if there are other sources, maybe there's a way to kind of designate or earmark that those non-tax exempt bond sources are paying for that. But I think it's still to be determined, like how successful that actually can be.
Thank you.
All right, thanks. Seema has a question, and then Steve.
Hi there. It was a really nice presentation. I wanted to get your take on how the market is reacting to it. How are these getting operationalized? I mean, these are tremendous in terms of what Fed has done, but when are we getting the specifics so we see the market moving and be able to take care of it?
I think that's the question everybody's asking. I think that's a good, So everybody was hoping that February, so this month, there will be a lot more clarification from the IRS, and they have put some regulations out, although I wouldn't even call them regulations. I mean, I would call them like initial guidance. And each one of them also has a line in them saying that there's going to be forthcoming guidance, explaining more. So it's like, I mean, and you see the list here. I mean, the list is tremendous. I mean, you just on the existing expansions, they need to explain a lot. But then there's also a whole other host, like a new programs that they have to do. So, I mean, I kind of feel for them, and they got a lot of work to do, but everybody's waiting. I mean, that is really true. And a lot of people are saying, even for these elections, like, we need to know how to do these elections before we're even gonna like move on this. So, and just because how big of the big scope of this, it's like, and kind of the far-reaching nature, because there's going to be new tools and new like financing options and new products that are going to be developed. I mean, we haven't even thought of today, that are going to be created, through the market, to approach each of these. And each one of these will have, if they don't have already, a little cottage industry of like how this is going to like be executed, right? And there's going to be a lot of money made, and there's going to be a lot of new companies started, again, just on the bonuses, right? And so we actually have a webinar my firm is putting on for the explaining kind of the prevailing wage, just the prevailing wage, like a huge change. A lot of people don't know exactly how it's going to go, like a lot of questions, what if a state doesn't have prevailing wage? So how do you determine that? And who exactly is on the hook if like the prevailing wage isn't going to be complied with? So, I'm hoping that more regs are going to be coming out this month, but based on what's been out so far, I think they're going to be very shallow, shallow guidance that kind of gives a little bit more information, but not too much more. And, it might not be till summer or even like end of this year where we're really going to get the regs. And some of these, some of the regs, again, talk about like application deadlines. And so that's very useful. but then it doesn't really give you the actual like application process. It'll just say, like for the bonus for the environmental justice, third quarter. So now, yeah, we know third quarter, but we don't have we don't know what they're going to ask for. So it's a little helpful, but not super helpful yet. So yeah, we'll see. I guess that's the only answer I can keep saying.
No, thank you so much. But is there any certainty other than the 30% and the basis reduction for LIHTCs? Is there anything that, building owners and developers can latch on right away as of now to include?
Yeah, I mean, sure. I mean, I think, again, there is the statute, and the statute is,
Yeah.
And especially with the existing programs that got expanded. I mean, people have been doing solar deals. I mean, it's just the mechanics of like, how do you take advantage of the bonus, right? And it's an awkward time because the decisions need to be made now, but you don't have all the information. So it's, kind of like a lot of business decisions, is an imperfect, information environment, and who's going to take the risk, who's going to go first.
Exactly.
And and the risk and reward kind of calculation. So I mean, I think people are planning already, and people are deciding, to go with prevailing wages, right, and line up apprentices, and it's just a lot of the specifics are just unknown. So a ton of people are just waiting. So again, it's kind of a weird time that people just need to decide kind of what their approach is going to be.
Thank you so much.
Okay, Steve had a question?
Two questions. One, I live in Greenwich, Connecticut, and we have a committee working on the development of a new school here. And I'm just wondering if that committee shouldn't be consulting. It's actually been delayed, but they're going to continue working on the design development. But I'm just gathering from what you presented that they should be talking to you or someone like you to examine what financial advantages might be out there. Is that true?
Yes. So yeah, so many. I mean, just this election, the election to get a cash refund for like public entities. So yeah, we're talking with like public schools, public libraries, anybody that's trying, like universities that want to put solar on their campus. Like now you're able to get a cash refund to pay for that. And so, I mentioned like different products that will be developed. So I'm talking with as many banks as I can, because what I think the nonprofits need and the public agencies might need is financing at the beginning of the process, right? So you get a loan from a lender, and then that loan gets repaid back when the cash refund comes in after the project is complete. So, as far as I know, nothing is official. Again, I'm talking with every bank to like say you got to set up this project. But yeah, any like school district, public library, you're doing a big geothermal project or a big solar project. You're doing energy efficient kind of windows where you can allocate the deduction to the designer. So that that's the other part of it where you can engage if if you're planning to get this 179D type of work done with a very energy efficient property. I mean, that could be a substantial benefit, $5 per square foot.
Yeah.
But again, the public agencies can't take advantage of it, but they could allocate it to the designer. And then that begs the question, okay, well, then how does that benefit the school district or or the town? And my answer to that is like, you need to negotiate up front that there's some type of split of the incentive, right? Where so it's either a reduction in a designer's fee or some other credit. But that all needs to happen up front. So that function has been around actually since the beginning of 179D. But I think the heightened value of this now makes it much more important to kind of pay attention to this at the beginning. So yeah, so again, happy to talk to anybody that you think might be thinking about this.
Right. There are two two things that could pop into my head. One is the gentleman in our town who's really quite pro energy efficiency and doing in net zero energy schools, and I will put him in touch with you, I guess, or make him at least aware of that so he could reach out to you. Because the budget on this is a big town issue, what's costing too much money, this and that. So having these incentives will be very encouraging. Two, I am looking to talk to several developers about kind of a new spin on heat pumps. It's a water source energy heat pump system. And when, aside from that, when I approach a developer and start saying, look, we have to start talking about this right at the concept stage of your design. And we should really review your design in it before it gets too fully developed to take advantage of all this stuff.
Yeah.
And I assume you would agree 100%.
You do not want to go down like, plans and specs and then find out, oh, actually, we don't even get the credit because of this. So it's tough. It's like, there are standards, right? And I think a lot of the questions around the regs and getting detail also revolve around, what standards are there, right? And what are they going to be measuring? But, for example, for 179D, they've put new different pathways that you can approach. There's still the ASHRAE standard for the energy efficient homes. There is a benchmark for Energy Star and net zero ready. But even there, I see there's still a scramble for even those kind of benchmark setting organizations to actually be clear, or at least communicate clearly what it takes to actually get those certifications. So I think all around people need to we'll all need to work to be clear and accurate in terms of what the standards are, just so because it helps everybody, right? So, but yeah, happy to put forth arguments or lay out the benefits of why you need to be looking at this early, to any developer contacts or even the designers. I really put it on the designers too, to say, hey, you got to know this stuff so that you could present it to your clients and the developers. So if you bring these ideas to them, obviously it's a value add in the service that you provide, right? So, and the developers are too busy to kind of figure this out and get into the weeds of ASHRAE standards and blah blah blah. You got to be the ones bringing it. And so so my distribution list for my compendium and these types of resources, I've been trying to hit the the architectural community and the AEC community, just so that they can be proponents of these things as well.
Great, thank you so much.
Thanks, Steve. Anybody else have a question? I'll ask one, Jerome. In one of your slides, you showed I think it was where allocations according to different status structures or something like that. You're saying this much would be available, what percentage and the megawatts in that?
Yeah. That's the environmental justice slide. Yep.
Oh, I see. Okay. But of all of these that are coming in, are given that money isn't infinite, even though this is a big project, are these all going to be competitive? Will you be in a state competing with based on what you're proposing to do, or do you envision them as being automatic if you do what the standards are that they've set up for you?
Yeah. So that's a good question. So for this specific program, the environmental justice solar or wind here, this is going to be a competitive application. How competitive and kind of what exactly that means and who are you actually competing against, I think is unknown. But I say competitive because there is just an annual limit, right? So assuming that there's going to be more projects than that annual limit, there's going to be some type of competition,
Process.
some type of process, and maybe it's just first come first serve. Who knows? But 1.8 gigawatts per year, right? And one thing I didn't mention is that you have to be less than 5 megawatts per project to get to this bonus. But yeah, just this week, these megawatt breakouts were published. So again, the 4 categories are this low-income census tract, new market, essentially like a new market census tract, Indian land, low-income buildings, residential buildings, and then economic benefit projects. So those are the 4 categories. It sounded like the application process for the I think it was the low-income residential building and the economic benefit projects were going to come first. Sounded like those 2 categories were going to be first for the application process to be open in the 3rd quarter, and then the other 2 following that. But you see the megawatt breakouts. So, you know, I was a little surprised about the 200 megawatts on the buildings, because I actually thought that those were going to be the most popular out of actually all of them. But generally, if you're on a building, I think you're going to be a smaller project. So maybe that was their thinking. And I think there's probably some language in there, if I remember, where if one category isn't like fully subscribed, or they would be able to like shift around the allocation. But again, I think that's all like to be determined. But we did get some initial guidance out this week, but it was mainly this breakout and then the timeline of like when the actual application is going to be out.
Gotcha. Okay. It looks like Kathy has another question, and then Seema. Oops. Kathy, are you? You might be muted.
Sorry about that. Yeah. First of all, Jerome, all of this is such amazing, great information. So I'm understanding here that if you successfully competed for the affordable housing and the environmental justice, you could have up to a 70% credit on your solar system.
So yeah, I mean, if you stack up all the bonuses, right? So here's the list of bonuses. So prevailing wage mostly will automatically get you to 30%. So just a side note on that. So for like large solar projects, like these farms and such, you have to do prevailing wage and apprenticeship in order to at least get to 30. So if you're a big project and you don't do prevailing wage and apprenticeship, you're actually only at 6% tax credit. So that's, again, probably doesn't apply for most of this group. So let's say your starting point is 30. If you had domestic content, let's say your solar panels were made in the USA, or you had some type of wind system that was made in the USA, you get plus 10. So that'll take you to 40%, right? From 30 to 40. If you happen to be in an energy community, again, those metropolitan statistical areas in that slide, that can get you to 50, because that would be another 10% bump. And then if you were located in a low-income housing building and you get the allocation for environmental justice, that'll give you a plus 20, so that you could actually be theoretically up to a 70% tax credit. So, I mean, you'd have to be in a perfect project with all the bonuses, but yeah, theoretically you can get to 70%.
Wow, that's great. And then I have some follow-up detailed questions. And if we don't have other questions, I thought after that we could have some discussion about what we could do in Connecticut. But this 179D that goes to the designer, so does the designer have to take that credit themselves? So like if I'm the architect for a project and I get the 5%, I can take that as part of my fee. Can I then sell it, or do I have to?
Yeah, it's a little bit of a gray area, and there has been some sticking points about exactly kind of like how this works with designers. And so for the designers, you should definitely talk to your accountants, like, if you're looking to get this. So I guess the first thing is that, so it's not a tax credit. You got to be clear on that. It's not a tax credit. It's a tax deduction. So it's not a dollar for dollar reduction on taxes. And whether the designer can actually claim the deduction, which could be useful, right? Again, you'd have to check
Yep.
your accountant and make sure your tax situation actually allows that. Because the other wrinkle is that, see, a lot of design firms, engineering firms, or whoever, like, are partnerships.
Yep.
Like you're in a firm, maybe you're a solo, but you're typically you can be in a firm. And so that there is, is there an ability to share those deductions, through the partners and the partnership? Again, it's a different question than the project energy efficiency question, but those are the things that you'd want to research about, the allocation to the designer on these.
Great, that's really helpful. And then on the 6418 transfer, can you walk us a little more through how that looks? Can it transfer to any taxpayer? Does it have to be a C Corp or, an individual or anybody or?
Yeah. So again, this is one that everybody's waiting for regs on this one. This is probably the one that most people are waiting the regs. The most popular one that people are waiting for regs on. But as far as I know, it's any taxpayer. Yeah, it just can't be related to you. Like, so if you pay tax, you're not a tax exempt organization, and you pay cash for it, you can get the transfer. So let's say you were a small building owner, small for-profit building owner, commercial building, and you want to put solar on your roof, but you don't really have, you don't need the tax credit. You don't have enough taxes to really offset, you need to offset the taxes. You can just take the tax credits that you would earn from that solar project and go find somebody else, like a bank, right? Or an insurance company. I assume that there will be brokers, or there are a lot of brokers already calling me and trying to figure out what the market is. I assume that there'll be brokers that will get into this business, right? Matchmaking taxpayers who could use it, and taxpayers who need it, who need to monetize it. But yeah, the high requirements that we know, high level requirements that we know are what's on the slide. Any unrelated taxpayer. You don't transfer the depreciation. So that's something I didn't mention earlier. So if there are high depreciation values in your project, especially for bigger projects, you might not want to do this, or you might want to do it in conjunction with some other investment structure that allows the depreciation to actually get transferred to an investor, because that actually is also a big value. But yeah, that's kind of all we know so far.
Great, thank you very much.
Okay, then Seema is next, and then Steve again.
All right, it's kind of related to my earlier question. I work for Connecticut Housing Finance Authority, and a lot of our projects are LIHTC projects, and a lot of them also have prevailing wage already met. Is there anything that our developers can assume in their capital stack that can reduce the upfront, capitalized cost? Is there anything in here that improves?
I mean, if there's solar on a LIHTC project,
Yeah.
You should assume a higher tax credit equity investment.
Yeah, that would be 30%, and then the 20% for the LIHTC. And a lot of times they are in those Sensex tracks, or 40 communities.
Yeah.
Can they safely assume like maybe like 40% when they are already doing LIHTC, or like 50%? Or no?
The problem is that, again, that there's this allocation process, there's this competitive process.
Yeah.
I think most people, if you're like a housing developer that's focused on like low-income communities and doing affordable housing, I think most of them are saying, okay, this policy is exactly for us, and we have a good chance of like getting this bonus. They're planning for it. So to me, it's, since these are mainly tax credits and if you have an investor in a housing deal, it's really going to be, the sources side is going to be increased because you can now double dip on the low income housing tax credit and the investment tax credit, so that your equity amount should be higher because you're delivering more credits to the investor. So that is where I mainly see it. The other piece, which I haven't talked to at all about this, is the non-tax credit side, which is the greenhouse gas reduction fund, that the EPA, I think it's the EPA, is going to be administering. So, so totally separate from the tax credits. The federal government has $27 billion in the greenhouse gas reduction fund that is supposed to go to, again, 40% is supposed to go to low-income areas and benefit low-income households. I think it was something like 7 billion going through being allocated through states and municipalities and kind of government agencies, and then 20 billion through other channels. And I think people are expecting that those would be going through like CDFIs mainly. I think there's also talk about green banks and national green banks and all that, but we'll see. But there's going to be grants, and I would expect grants. I would expect low interest loans, other funds to support technical assistance. Who knows what kind of structures. I can imagine maybe even a guarantee structure to leverage other capital. But there are these other dollars that will be coming out in the next, I'll say 2 years. So it's a pretty short time frame, 2 years, 3 years, maybe. 27 billion. So that's the whole other piece that this, my presentation is not covering at all, but again, a huge benefit for the projects that we're talking about, especially if we're talking about low-income housing.
Thank you.
Sorry, I was muted. Steve, you have another question?
Yeah, I did. You mentioned that you were trying to reach out to commercial real estate lenders. I happen to have a really good colleague and friend who is for M&T, commercial real estate lender. Would you like to or suggest that she contact you?
Yes, please. So you see my contact information there, or I can get your contact from Kathleen or Vicky or Dean. So yeah, just email me. I'm talking with a bunch of regional banks, talk to Eastern Bank. I've talked to some TD Bank, some of these other ones that I think would be a good match because they understand tax credits already. So anyway, any type of lender contacts, I'd love to kind of pitch this idea of trying to set up, especially for the nonprofits, this idea of setting up a bridge loan product. There could be a lot of money made for those lenders to just providing that product. So I think they're going to want to figure this out sooner rather than later. But yeah, email me. I'd love to make any contacts that you think would be useful.
Okay, I will.
Okay. Sorry, Kathy, go ahead.
You also have lenders. The Green Bank sponsors this and is on, and obviously is a lender against energy, and SEMA is here from the Housing Finance Agency. So it might be useful to talk a little bit more about how you see those products working and how they might participate.
Yeah, yes, I know some of the Green Bank people. Obviously they would be limited to the state, but yeah, if there's a product, if there's a product that needs to be developed, they should be the one doing it, really. And maybe they have. Again, I haven't kind of talked in detail about this, but in terms of housing finance agencies, I think that could also be a good possibility. We haven't talked about PACE financing, how PACE financing could be incorporated into all of this. But that's another hot topic. You know, again, the way that I see it is that the nonprofits need, you know, let's say $1 million to do a solar project. So they borrow $1 million. They're going to get, let's say, 30% of that in a tax credit, but that's a cash refund, but that's not going to happen until let's say 2 years later. So there's going to be a 2-year loan that would bridge the time they for $1 million to actually build a project. The lender is going to get paid back, you know, when the cash refund is, you know, $300,000, right? And then so the remaining 700 could either get paid off from other sources or paid off over time. You know, again, there's other different structures of revenue streams based on a solar project, but something like that, I think, could be very useful to, you know, a nonprofit or a public agency or, you know, a school or municipality, something like that.
Great. Kathy, did you have anything more?
No, I think that's really great. It's really exciting. If we want to keep up with, you know, these competitive processes and where they come out, can you recommend where we should be watching?
You know, certainly the IRS will publish these, the guidance will be coming from the IRS. And I think for the environmental justice, the Department of Energy is going to be involved. So if you're, you know, signed up for any of those alerts, that would, you know, that should alert you too. But yeah, I mean, I think that the latest is that third quarter is going to be kind of when this all comes out. And so I assume, you know, maybe during the summer, there'll be, you know, more specifics because people would need to prepare it for these actual applications. So they're going to need to give something else other than what they've given, you know, this week. But feel free to, yeah, email me if you want to get added. If you're not on my list already for the distribution of the compendium, email me and ask to be added. I'm happy to do that. And our law firms are going to do a series of webinars all this year and probably all next year on all the elements of Inflation Reduction Act. So if you want to be alerted to those opportunities, yeah, let me know and I'll add you to the list.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks,
Great.
Jerome. I think we're at time. Great presentation, great conversation, and it looks like there's going to be much more to come as we keep track of all of this. I wanted to ask you one quick closing question, which is, who put this together? You know, I mean, this is the massive program. Do you have any idea how this was? It seems relatively intelligent to me, not worked out in the details, but sort of massively progressive and thoughtful.
Yeah, I mean,
coming out of Washington.
My sense is this has been trying to be pushed for like, I would say decades, but I mean, so I think, again, kind of a high level understanding is this was part of the Build Back Better, and Build Back Better didn't get passed. I mean, okay, so for affordable housing people out there, like we wanted to get Build Back Better. I mean, that was the ultimate, like Build Back Better. But we didn't get that. They carved this piece out and they're actually able to get that done. So, but you know, so what, you know, I was hoping that we would get this and the Build Back Better for the low income housing, you know, boosts. That would have been the ultimate, but you know, definitely this is good. And you know, we'll see. Again, there's a lot of, you know, how the sausage is made, and they're different. You know, you could see even in the statute, you can see the different kind of political, like, yeah, favors that needed to be, you know, paid off in order to get this passed. But anyway, I think overall it's good. And again, we're just at the beginning, so we'll see how it plays out.
Yeah, it plays out. We'll definitely stay in touch, and the network will definitely stay engaged with this issue. So with that, I think I'll close the meeting. Vicki, do you just want to make a quick announcement of our next one next month?
Sure. Yes. Hello, everyone. I just wanted to let you know about next month's presentation. The topic will be commercial heat pump water heaters, and our presenters will be Zachary Coach and Mitchell Joseph of Mitsubishi Electric Trane HVAC LLC. I'll be sending out an email later on today with the registration link and some more details about the topic and a description. So look out for that.
Terrific.
And
Okay.
I'm sorry, the date will be March 17th, Friday.
Okay. All right. Anybody, any final comments or questions from anybody before we close? Taking that as resounding, let's close. We will close. Thank you again, Jerome. It was
Thank
really
you,
great.
everyone. Thank you so much, Jerome.
Thank you. You're welcome.
All right. Bye, everybody.